Odo walked among the people without fanfare or grand speeches. His presence alone was enough to pull tired shoulders straighter. He checked the reinforced gates, inspected the towers of Roman stone that had guarded the streets for 600 years, and watched as soldiers drilled in the courtyards until their movements grew sharp and instinctive. There was no time for perfection, only readiness. From the highest walls, the view of the surrounding countryside shifted week by week. Traffic thinned. Merchants stopped arriving. The roads emptied except for occasional scouts racing home with dust clinging to their cloaks. Each report brought the same conclusion. The enemy marched with discipline, pressing forward without delay toward their target. Inside Toulouse, the atmosphere changed. Fear still lived there in every heart, but something stronger rose beside it, a shared certainty that they were defending not just a city, but everything they were as a people. Then, one cold morning, everything changed. A murmur moved through the watchtowers, then spread across the walls until even the children carrying water baskets felt it. The horizon to the south had darkened, not with clouds, but with movement. Lines of cavalry, columns of infantry, stretching farther than the eye could follow. Standards rising and falling like waves on an ocean of steel. The Umayyad army had reached the plains before Toulouse. From the ramparts, the people of the city watched the formation grow into an immense shadow, slowly settling across the land. There were no cries, no shouts, only a tight, breathless silence as reality took shape. During the night, after the Umayyad army reached the plains, Toulouse did not sleep. The enemy campfires burned in long, organized lines, casting an orange glow that seemed to press closer with every hour. Even from within the walls, the people could hear it, the steady, disciplined rhythm of an army settling into position like a fist, slowly closing around the city. By dawn, the transformation was complete. What had been an open plain the day before had become a fortress of its own. Tents stood in perfect rows, supply wagons formed guarded corridors, watchtowers built from stacked shields appeared along the perimeter. Everything about the Umayyad camp spoke of confidence, resources, and the intention to stay until Toulouse broke. By mid-morning, the Umayyads made their first move. Not an attack, but something more unsettling. They cut the roads. Units of cavalry fanned out across the countryside, blocking every path leading into or out of Toulouse. Watchfires were placed on ridges to signal movement. Scouts patrolled in silent, sweeping arcs. The message was unmistakable. No one would enter, no one would leave. Toulouse had become an island in a sea of enemy soldiers, completely isolated from the outside world. Odo stood on the northern tower, watching dust rise from the distant patrols. There was no immediate assault, no attempt to break the walls yet, only a tightening net designed to suffocate hope. It was a different kind of warfare, one he knew well from studying Roman siege tactics. The slow, methodical approach meant to grind an enemy down long before a battering ram touched the gate. Meanwhile, the Umayyads continued their preparations with cold precision. They brought forward heavy timbers and long bundles wrapped in cloth. Soon, the distant clatter of metal signaled the construction of siege engines, though none were yet rolled toward the walls. They were building something larger, something meant to break more than stone. They were building psychological pressure. Then, the waiting ended. A single drumbeat rolled across the field, deep, heavy, absolute. The first assault had begun. It started with the archers. A wave of arrows burst upward, darkening the sky like a swarm of locusts. The defenders threw themselves behind merlons as arrowheads hammered into the stone with vicious force that sent chips flying. Every strike echoed through the walls, rattling bone and nerve alike. Moments later, the siege engines lurched forward, not battering rams yet, but towering wooden screens that shielded entire squads of soldiers beneath them. The defenders could see feet beneath the wooden walls, marching in perfect step, moving the structure inch by inch toward Toulouse's towers. From the streets below, residents heard the muffled thunder, the rhythmic pounding of hundreds of boots advancing under cover. Odo's captain shouted for boiling pitch. Cauldrons were hauled up by chains, sloshing hot liquid as defenders braced themselves for the first brutal exchange. When the covered screens finally reached the base of the walls, Toulouse unleashed everything. Stones crashed down like meteors, pitch burst in sheets of fire, slingers hurled lead bullets with enough force to shatter helmets, yet even as the first screen splintered, new ones slid into place behind them. The lines did not break, they thickened. Then the first battering rams appeared. They were carried under long iron-plated roofs and pushed forward by dozens of men. The sound of wood creaking under weight traveled up the walls, a deep, ominous groan that made defenders' stomachs tighten. All across the battlements, soldiers leaned forward, gripping stones, gripping spears, gripping hope. And then the first blow landed. A single impact, heavy, echoing through the gate, through the ground, through the bones of every person inside the city. It didn't break anything yet, but it marked the true beginning of the siege. By the second week of the siege, Toulouse felt smaller than it ever had. The walls still stood, but something inside them had begun to shrink. The streets grew quieter, markets shut down. People moved with slow, cautious awareness as if every sound might echo too loudly. Outside the walls, the Umayyad camp expanded like a growing shadow. Watchtowers of timber rose higher. Siege platforms multiplied. Long trenches curled through the soil, marking new positions inch by inch. Inside Toulouse, exhaustion spread like disease. The defenders on the ramparts looked older than they had a week before. Even the youngest soldiers walked with stiff movements, their muscles worn by endless tension. Rationing began quietly without announcement. Bread grew thin. Water was measured in careful ladles. Families improvised meals from scraps that once would have been thrown away. Yet isolation was the worst of all. No rider could break out. No messenger could return. Every road was sealed by Umayyad patrols, whose speed and discipline made escape unthinkable. On the 5th day after the first assault, the Umayyads rolled forward a new set of engines, larger, darker, reinforced with iron plates that reflected the sun like shards of broken mirrors. The defenders felt the shift immediately. These machines weren't meant to test the walls. They were meant to shatter them. The first bombardment struck before noon. The engines didn't throw stones. They hurled entire slabs of carved rock. Each one landed with an impact that shook dust from ceilings and sent ripples through the wells. By nightfall, cracks had begun to appear along sections of the outer parapets. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to remind everyone that stone, even ancient Roman stone, could not endure forever. On the 7th day, the enemy changed tactics again. Small units moved closer, carrying bundles of reeds and leather shields. Odo recognized the pattern instantly. They were preparing blind zones beneath the walls where defenders couldn't aim. Once those blind zones were created, sappers could move in, digging under the foundations, undermining the stone from beneath. It was slow, methodical, and deadly, terrifying the defenders far more than any ladder or ram, because it meant the walls could collapse without warning, burying men alive in rubble. On the 10th day, the siege stopped being a slow tightening of the noose and turned into a blade. Just before sunrise, Toulouse was shaken awake by a sound deeper and heavier than anything they'd heard so far, the roar of mass movement, thousands of men advancing at once. By the time the lookout sounded the alarm, the Umayyad army was already shifting into combat lines. The first blow fell on the western wall. A team of sappers, hidden for days near the trenches, ignited charges beneath the foundation. The explosion was small but strategic, just enough to shift an entire section of stone. The wall held, but the message was clear. The enemy could strike anywhere at any hour. The real assault followed instantly. Hundreds of shields rose together, forming a massive shell that advanced like a living creature. Behind that wall came 3 battering rams, each swinging beneath a roof of layered timber and wet hides. The first ram struck with a violent jolt that shook dust loose from the inner gatehouses. The shock ran through the stone, through the ground, through defenders' legs. A second impact followed, then a third. Each blow a reminder that the gate, Toulouse's heart, was mortal. On the eastern wall, another assault erupted. Tall siege ladders slammed against the battlements. Umayyad infantry surged upward, climbing 3 men at a time. Defenders met them with spears, axes, and stones hurled from desperate hands. The first soldier to reach the top was thrown backward instantly, crashing onto the men below. But more came. The wall turned into a narrow, frenzied struggle. blades clashing, shields splintering, men grappling and tumbling over the edge into the chaos below. For a moment, the defenders nearly broke completely. A battering ram struck the main gate so hard that the inner beams groaned like a living creature under strain. The entire structure buckled, splinters flew inward, men stumbled back in fear, but then they surged forward again with desperate fury. They shoved supports against the gate, they slammed wedges beneath the beams, they screamed in anger, in terror, in sheer defiance. And the gate held, barely. Finally, as the sky dimmed to a deep bruised red, the Umayyad drums signaled retreat. Not defeat, just a pause, a calculated breath. They pulled back in perfect order, leaving behind wreckage, bodies, and the shattered remains of ladders and rams. Toulouse did not celebrate. No one had the strength. Men collapsed against the walls. Women dragged water to the exhausted. Every heartbeat felt like a victory borrowed from the edge of collapse. The night after the great assault, Toulouse barely slept. Odo remained awake, walking the ramparts long after the last torch dimmed. He could feel it. An invisible thread stretched tight between the two armies. One more day of this, and Toulouse would break. Not from cowardice, but from sheer depletion. The walls were cracked. The gate was weakened. The people were starving. If he waited for the next assault, the city would fall. So Odo made the only decision that remained. He would not wait. He would strike first. Before dawn, he gathered the small mobile force he had hidden outside the city weeks earlier. Aquitanian levies who had been moving quietly through the countryside, assembling in fragments, guided by messengers who slipped through shadows. Now, in the dark hour before sunrise, they stood together at last, tired, bruised, but burning with quiet fury. As Toulouse watched from the walls, Odo and his hidden force rode out into the pre-dawn darkness, circling the hills, disappearing into shadows where they would wait for the perfect moment. Inside the enemy camp, the Umayyads prepared their next strike. Engineers reported rams repaired. Officers inspected ladders and shields. Infantry assembled in perfect rows beneath the stars. No one expected an attack from outside, not after 10 days of siege. As the sky lightened, Umayyad commanders signaled their troops into formation for the morning offensive. Then they heard it, a rumble from the north, faint at first, then growing. Odo came from the shadows at full speed, his cavalry charging downhill with terrifying momentum. The sound exploded across the plains. The Umayyads scrambled to form defensive lines, but the surprise was complete. Odo's riders smashed into their flank like a hammer shattering bronze. The impact ripped through the camp. From the walls, Toulouse erupted in disbelief. The defenders opened the gates and charged out, striking the disoriented Umayyads from the front, coordinated perfectly with Odo's assault from behind. Caught between two waves, the Umayyad army finally faltered. Al-Sam was killed in the chaos. The lines dissolved. What had been the most feared force in Iberia became a broken mass trying desperately to escape. Toulouse had endured not because its walls were strong, but because its people refused to let an empire erase them. Subscribe to Great History for more battles where endurance and perfect timing defeated overwhelming odds.